Tired of restless nights? At Lisa, we know good sleep is essential for mental, physical, and emotional health. From memory foam mattresses to hybrids that keep you cool all night long, Lisa's mattresses offer exceptional comfort and support with free delivery and 100 nights to try out your mattress in the comfort of your home. For a limited time, save up to $700 off select mattresses plus 2 free pillows. Go to lisa.com/iHeart for an additional $50 off mattresses and select goods. Exclusions apply. See lisa.com for more details.
Brought to you by the first ever Toyota Grand Highlander. Hello, friends. Jack, Flight School O'Brien here, also known as Jack. Still can touch net if I get a running start and haven't eaten heavy breakfast. O'Brien, both nicknames that I go by. Inviting you to check out Miles and Jack Got Mad Boosties for a weekly basketball conversation with me and my co-host from the Daily Zeitgeist, Miles Gray. We are joined by comedians, writers, podcasters, and fellow NBA fans as we discuss the latest news and events from around the league. Check it out. Miles and Jack Got Mad Boosties. Brought to you by the first ever Toyota Grand Highlander.
It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs, have some fun.
Hello, everybody, live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. John Schmelk, Madeline Burke will be your host for today, and we have a cavalcade of guests all week long. And to lead us off, our
what
first
a word.
Cavalcade's a good word.
It's a solid word,
Very good
right?
word. And a wordsmith himself, Dan Duggan, who writes for The Athletic, covers the Giants. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm honored to be leading off the cavalcade. That's big stuff right there.
You're at the point of the spear, Dan. And we had a lot of stuff going on this morning. Joe Shane had his press conference for the media. We had him here for a live Q&A. Go check that out. We have the archive posted up on Giants.com, YouTube, Giants Huddle Podcast as well. If you want the audio form, go check that out. If it's not up, it should be up there shortly. So, Dan, let's just kind of start very briefly. What were your major takeaways from what we heard from Joe Shane today?
My major takeaways, there wasn't a lot of great takeaways. I think Joe did some self-scouting and he tightened it up a little bit. I mean, obviously, these types of things, GMs are really trying not to say anything, basically, that can be used against them or used by another team. But I think Joe really did a good job of that. You could interpret pretty much everything he said maybe how you wanted to, but he didn't have anything that really pinned him down in any way. Again, that's kind of the objective. But I do feel like in the past, Joe has maybe let things slide, and it felt like he was pretty buttoned up today, unfortunately, for me and my my fellow scribes.
But, I mean, to that point as well, I think there's a lot of questions still around a lot of things for the Giants, right? Not just the number 6 overall pick, but also free agency 2 weeks away. The salary cap numbers just came out, and he said, as he always does, they were preparing for more like 241, 243 to be a little bit more conservative. So when that number came in and it was so much more, it gives you a little more wiggle room. And so as a staff, they still have to reevaluate what they're going to do with free agency, what they're going to do with the franchise tag, what they're going to do with the transition tag. When you look at all the kind of options that are out there, there's a lot of needs positionally for this Giants team, but there's also a lot of different directions they can go. How do you approach that?
Yeah, no, I mean, there definitely is uncertainty because he can't sit here and say what we're going to do because you do have the 6th pick, and there's a lot of moving pieces ahead of you. And as you said, and as he mentioned, free agency is going to kind of set the table there, too. He might say, we're going to go out and sign a offensive guard, and then all of a sudden, the Patriots re-sign on Wanu, and guys don't hit the market and stuff like that. So you can have the best laid plans, but I mean, this is a time for a lot of uncertainty. So obviously, we're trying to pull threads, and again, he's obviously holding things close to the chest, but he can't necessarily say how things are going to play out, even with his own guys. Because I mean, I'm sure if you talk to him this year, at this time last year, they probably did have optimism things were going to get done with Saquon. And then obviously that did not come to pass, and we all know how long that played out. So I think he's a little more guarded publicly, but also I'm sure he's learning. This is really his second time fully going through the process. Obviously he got hired 2 years ago. But so going through this process of negotiating with your own guys, he's learning how, it might not go according to plan, and you have to be able to pivot.
Well, and you brought up Saquon, too. And speaking of negotiating, I mean, Dan, you talk to a lot of agents, talk to a lot of scouts, but one of the big differences between this year's negotiation and last year's is Saquon changed representation. Last year he was with Rock Nation. This year he was with CAA. Joe mentioned that at the podium, that this is a new agent that they're going to be working with. So, I mean, from your perspective and your sourcing, will that affect how these negotiations go?
it seems like Joe has better feelings about Saquon's new representation. I think last year there's definitely a feeling, in the agent community and also just maybe common sense that Saquon's agent kind of overplayed his position there, where I think that they really felt like Daniel's going to get tagged, we're going to hit the open market, and we're going to just fall into a pile of money like Scrooge McDuck. And then obviously, they were 7 minutes away from being right. You know what I mean? Obviously, that Daniel deal got done so late that it was a gamble. They lost, and now the problem is he's always probably going to be chasing the money that was offered, last March. And it's going to be very hard to recoup that. He obviously couldn't recoup it in July. Another year, it's going to be even harder. But yeah, the change of representation, I think that was kind of an obvious move Saquon had to make because obviously things did not go the way he wanted to last year. So yeah, maybe that does, provide a little a fresh feeling, some optimism as they go back to the table. Because as I mentioned to Joe, it's odd to be in this spot where you had rounds of negotiations with a guy, and then the next year you end up basically back in the exact same spot to start it over again. So maybe a new voice in the room could help speed the process along this time.
And as Joe was asked specifically, Madeline, about what guides your principles here, is it the running back market or is his importance to the team? And it was probably the most succinct answer he had throughout the entire media available. Yeah. The running back market.
Yeah, probably the most telling answer too.
Right. And he also mentioned that look at all the running back free agents this year. Are you going to find 4 or 5 teams that are willing to pay a running back more than $10 million average annual salary? I don't know about that.
Yeah, no.
So you're right. I think if it ends up being a comparison to what reportedly was offered last year, I'm not sure how well that's going to go. And I'm curious to see how long those running backs stay on the market once free agency opens. Like, my feel, Dan, I'm curious to get your take. It's not going to be like, all right, Monday, negotiating window open, 2 o'clock, you're getting these top running back signing places. I think these guys are going to kind of wait to see which one jumps at that first deal, and and then that's going to kind of set the standard,
Right. Yeah, I mean, you go back to last year, and it never got off the ground because the top 3 guys got franchised, but it was like Miles Sanders got that, $6 million a year or something like that, and I don't feel like that happened right in the first wave because, again, the whole thing about having more cap space, that's going to go to the premium positions first and foremost, and your offensive tackles, your edge rushers, your corners, your wide receivers, those guys, they're going to get, reap the benefits of that. It's kind of to be determined how it's going to impact the next tier of free agent, but also the non-premium positions. Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a gold rush for running backs suddenly this year because, again, it's been trending this way for years and years and years, and now the fact Joe used the word saturated, there's a lot of big names out there, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, all of the guys.
Tony Pollard,
Josh
Jacobs,
yeah. So it would be hard for me to see the league, let alone just the Giants, but just the league reverse the trend when there's so many guys that I can sit back and say, I'll get Austin Eckler at this rate rather than, throw in the bag at Saquon on day one of free agency. So no, I think it's going to be, a rough market, again, and that's why I thought I was telling that Joe said that, is like the running back market is going to determine, what Saquon's value is. We love him, great guy, but we're not going to just pay him $4 million than anyone else would just because we love him.
Well, and that's also, too, the point of last year's offer keeps getting brought up. Last year's offer against last year's salary cap, which was $30 million fewer. So it's like, does that change? And you look at the fact that, the Giants have so much more to play with, but so does everyone else. Right. So how does that even the playing field in that? And Saquon's not really the only free agent that the Giants have to negotiate with. Another one that came up in Joe Shane's media availability this morning was Xavier McKinney. He said he hasn't yet had conversations with those representatives. Plans to do that later this week. David Mulugeta, his agent's coming into town Friday. Xavier McKinney, a guy who played 100% of the snaps last season, was a captain on this team, had an incredible year. Where does, in your perspective, how vital is that?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm ranking the priorities, he would be a bigger priority to me than Saquon for the things you just ticked off. I mean, 24 years old. I mean, I know he's had some injury issues. Obviously, one was totally unrelated to football, but, everyone's moved past that. But he's had 100% of the snaps. He's been durable on the football field. Safety is one of those positions where, you could argue, is it a premium position? No, but, I mean, it's a valuable position because, again, you never come off the field. I think in Shane Bowen's defense, it's going to be really important to have strong play there. And just the fact that he's so young, he's been a captain here. These are the players you should be paying. You can save the money on McKinney, whatever that ends up being, unless it's crazy. But save that money there and then go spend it on some player you don't know. This guy's been in your building for 4 years. Joe always talks about guys who can thrive in New York. Again, McKinney's had an interesting, he's had a few hiccups here and there, but he can play in this market. So that's the type of guy I want to extend if I'm a GM. And now again, they sit down. Dave Mulugeta has lined a lot of safeties' pockets in his day, so he's not going to be looking to give some hometown discount. But, I mean, that's a guy I think would be a priority.
Last one on Fringy before we get to the draft. I asked him this question on the Q&A, and he didn't really give a great answer in terms of giving me a guidance, but we saw it with Okereke last year. To me, Dan, guard has to be your number one deal here. I think it's just a matter of how close to the top of the market do you want to go to find that. You got to have at least one veteran guard, right?
No, I mean, totally. I mean, I mentioned on Wenu, and like he is just like the perfect fit, which is a good reason why he might not leave New England, because you also have like the right tackle flexibility there too. So like with Evan Neal kind of up in the air, it's like, all right, we're going to sign you to be our right guard, but we also know if Evan Neal it doesn't turn around here in year 3, then we can slide you out to right tackle, and we have a good right tackle. So he's like the dream guy. But again, we're not the only ones aware of that. So I mean, he's going to be expensive. You don't know if he'll even get out of New England. But the guard market, I think it's definitely better than the tackle market anyways. Like, there's more depth there. There's more talent there.
Cheaper.
Exactly. So, you're not going to pay the top dollar for the B-level player. You can probably get better value there. And, yeah, they just need – I mean, they've tried the draft. I mean, you can't say they haven't invested in it in the draft. Just none of those guys have panned out. So you kind of keep saying, oh, keep drafting. That's great. But I think at some point you need to just shore up such a vital position. And, yeah, you have some money to spend. You look at other spots, like the offensive line, and particularly guard, I think is a very logical place to start.
Yeah, well, and it is also curious, too. I mean, you look at the things that this offensive line struggled against last year, like the stunts and the twists and what have you. And, going in practice against a Wink Martindale blitz-heavy defense is going to be different than going against a Shane Bowen defense that maybe does a few more of those things and says, okay, let's get a little bit more of these reps in there. That plus the consistency plus building a unit that, I mean, that's the unit as more than any other one on the field. 5-1 has to be the key, right? So health may be the priority more than anything.
Yeah, and again, that's where in free agency, you have to, do your homework and make sure you're getting guys who have a durability history, because like Okereke is the guy that, obviously I think Joe likes to reference because it was a big hit, but he was a very durable player in Indianapolis. He comes here, he plays 100% of the snaps. Like, you obviously have to look at that type of track record. But again, that is where I think there are guards who kind of fit the Bobby Okereke type mold. Like, not all pro players, because those guys just don't hit the market.
Yeah, Kevin Dotson, right?
Yeah, just a good, solid player who you can kind of set it and forget it. Again, he might not be an all pro, but it's also not going to be the disaster we saw at times with the guard spots last year.
All right, draft. Any feel based on what he said today, what he's doing? He literally, his quote was, "We will consider any player at 6 and at any position at the same time." And I will give the quote to make sure I have it right. I have faith in Daniel as our starting quarterback. Another thing he said. So how much do you think about QB there? I tried to get something out of him on wide receiver on our Q&A, which he seemed to be interested in. Is it O-line? I mean, can you go tackle when you just drafted Evan Neal? What's your feel for what that 6th overall pick might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the initial point. Did I get anything from today? No. I think he had a good poker face. And again, the draft,
I agree.
There's so much less certainty with the draft. He has a pretty good idea, free agency. But the draft, it's again, you're at the mercy of the 5 teams ahead of you. Obviously, we can introduce the possibility of trading up. He's not going to get pinned down on anything on the draft. But I will say, like, my vibe, so this isn't based on what he said today, just how I've read the situation. Like, Daniel's on the books. Daniel's going to be here next year one way or the other. I do think they want to add a quarterback in the draft. I don't think it's coming at 6 or at 3 moving up. I think in their ideal world, it's like maybe, I don't know if you can wait till the 2nd round, but maybe they trade back up into the late 1st, get one of those guys at 20, the Bo Nix kind of.
The Nix, Penix, McCarthy category, right?
Yeah, Lamar Jackson was taken 32nd.
And honestly, that's my kind of gut feeling too.
And it's dicey to me. Like, I don't love that. If I'm drafting a quarterback, I want to get the best one I possibly can, so I don't love that. And also, you're still kind of at the mercy of what happens, because you might say, oh, we'll trade back and get J.J. McCarthy, and all of a sudden he goes like 8th to Atlanta.
Well, the problem is that you might want a quarterback at 6, but if the top 3 teams decide they like these guys, they're not going to trade down even if you want to trade up. You might not have a choice.
And also, what an inexact science it is. I mean, you look at some of the quarterbacks that were taken at the top of drafts in years past that maybe haven't panned out as well as some of the latter ones were, so it's a little bit circumstantial as well. But as you know, Dan, I mean, these podiums, this is lying season right now. These GMs, these coaches are just saying whatever it is, because there's a lot of things that are going on. They don't want to show their hand because, hey, I want to get the best possible trade offer if someone wants to trade up to 6 or trade down to 6 or what have you. I want to make sure that I have all of my ducks in a row in that regard. But one thing that did stand out is Joe did say that Daniel's been throwing stationary for about 2 weeks now and is in line to be healthy for the start of training camp. So you've got to think that kind of plays a role in how they approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, the least surprising thing ever is like that Daniel Jones is attacking his rehab ahead of schedule. Like,
this man was carrying his crutches 2 days after surgery.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of fits the whole kind of narrative with him from day one. Just, you know, you knew he was going to work hard and all that, and that's great. I mean, obviously it'd be concerning if there was a setback. It would be out of his control, but like if there was an infection and whatever, like there hadn't been anything like that. So you can probably operate like, yes, he'll be ready for the start of camp, maybe not day one, but it sounds like he will be for day one the way Joe was talking today. So you operate with that. And that's where I'm wondering if they kind of like split the difference on the quarterback. Like, yeah, we want to bring somebody in as like an option, like the Jalen Hurts type plan where, you know, you had Carson Wentz, but you maybe weren't totally sold on him. You use a second round pick to get a guy, and obviously that worked out pretty well for Philly. That's where I kind of see like this compromise approach to it. Because like I said, there's no guarantee they even get one. If they could love all three of these top three quarterbacks, and so could the top three teams picking, and they just don't. It's, hey, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
So that's where I could see like maybe they split the difference. And again, I'm not crazy about that plan, but I don't make that decision. That's Joe's decision.
And it might be the only plan you have available to you. Like you said, it might be the best of what you got. Real quick, 15 seconds. If you had to guess right now, you can give me a player if you want. If you want to focus more on position, that's fine. What do the Giants do with that?
Wide receiver. So I think, you kind of hear Neighbors' name rising. But I still think Marvin Harrison's probably the number one receiver. So then it's Neighbors. Odunze. Yeah, I'll let you pronounce that first for me.
Any chance at Bowers, the tight end, that high?
I don't think so. It doesn't seem to fit Joe's positional value and all that.
And you don't think offensive tackle with Neal and Thomas?
I don't know, because you touched on, how many times can you keep putting top 10 resources? I mean, listen, they didn't fix it with Neal, but still, like, let's go sign a a veteran guy.
I mean, he's only played 20 games. Like, it's not a ton of games. So, you're with you. Dan, good stuff, my man.
Appreciate it.
Dan Duggan from The Athletic. We thank you for joining us. When we come back, Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus will be joining us next to talk some NFL football. We'll be right back from the Combine in Indy on the Big Blue Kickoff Live presented by Cadillac.
Most used emoji is either the laughing emoji or the crying emoji that I use when I'm laughing even extra harder. Something about me not a lot of people know would probably be that I'm a black belt. My favorite follow on social media is Rod Wave. I feel like I'm a huge Rod Wave fan. He's from around my hometown, so gotta follow him and see what he does with music he drops. My biggest pet peeve, man, I would say when people chew when they're talking when they're chewing.
This is fantastic. Makes your taste buds come alive.
And if they're dragging their feet when they walk, my parents always instilled in me not to do that. So I'll probably say those two things.
It's a thread.
A love affair. I fell in love with the Giants. I saw LT run the touchdown back when they played the Detroit Lions.
Pass down. Phil Simms was my dad's guy.
From generation.
Eli was my guy. To generation.
Giant Special.
We are
the New York Giants.
Most used emoji is laughing emoji. My all-time favorite character of Marvel is the Black Panther. I feel like being the first black character. Me being able to see that at this phase of my life, I like to support him. One thing about me that a lot of people don't know is that I'm 20 years old.
You're young. You're so young.
My biggest pet peeve is rushing. Rushing around, scrabbling around, unorganized.
Rush! You want to rush!
It's a thread. A bond. They are the epitome of what we try and be. A love affair. Eli Manning, first jersey I ever owned. Giants on 3! 1, 2, 3! Giants!
I love to be a wide receiver for Daniel Jones.
Caught! Touchdown, Giants!
We are
the New York Giants.
Let's go, Giants!
the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants, live from the Combine in Indianapolis. John Schmelk, Madeline Burke, joined by our good friend Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. Sam, you've been kind of listening to all the GMs and coaches this morning. Anything interesting that you've kind of taken out of what everyone's been talking about so far today, other than the Broncos are definitely getting a new quarterback, which seemed to be pretty clear listening to them?
Yeah, it's funny. These guys are all media trained. They don't say much deliberately. They're consciously out here not trying to give away much information. I think there's little snippets here or there. The conversation that Shane had about Saquon Barkley was pretty interesting. And then eventually I think we heard that Justin Madubuike probably is going to get franchise tagged if they can work out a deal there in Baltimore. But those are really it. It's just kind of confirmation of little bits and pieces that everybody assumed was happening anyway. Everything else is a lot of coach speak.
Yeah, and I mean, coach speak is what we're getting this time of year, keeping the cards close to the vest. But, one of the things that I found interesting is especially when you look at the salary cap number that just came out last week and how shocked a lot of people were at how big it was, how much of a jump that had. Joe Shane said that, they had been really conservative, as I'm sure a lot of people have. A lot of different teams, I'm sure this changes the way they approach free agency and the franchise tag and the transition tag. Is there a team that you think that this is going to make the biggest impact for?
Yeah, it's interesting. On the one hand, it looks like it should make a huge difference. All of a sudden, there's all this extra money for everybody to spend. On the other hand, it's for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So all it does really is kind of drive the price up. I think the biggest difference that it might make to teams is suddenly the franchise tag number becomes more palatable, right? Because you are dealing with a situation where that's guaranteed sum of money, hits your cap immediately, you're stuck with it, it reduces the flexibility that you have, but suddenly that amount of money is bigger. So teams can afford to make that move maybe now that mightn't have been thinking of the salary cap. So I think there's a few teams maybe that would have been on the fence or didn't want to use their tag might be more amenable to it now.
If you were to put the Sam Monson Giants offseason plan together to try to just set the team up the best, not just for this year but for the long term, how would you try to structure this thing with free agency and the draft?
It's tough. I mean, I think they made mistakes last offseason, and this offseason is a little bit about trying to repair that, trying to figure out where to go now. I think the Daniel Jones move last offseason was a mistake. He was a guy who was built for the franchise tag, right? We saw flashes of what he could do. We saw some improvement. We saw some signs of life in the first year in a new offense without particularly good receivers around him. It made sense to then give that guy a franchise tag, put him on a one-year deal, see what he can do the next year, or see if it all disappears around him. Instead, it felt like they got a little bit greedy, tried to lock him up, tried to then use the tag, keep Saquon Barkley around, and sort of try to do multiple things at the same time rather than the correct thing and sort of live with the consequences of that. And now we're in a situation where Daniel Jones didn't play well, got injured, nothing went well on offense overall, so now we don't even know if we have a quarterback, but we have one in contractual terms. So they're in a tough spot. Where they're picking in the draft, I mean, first of all, free agency is not a great place for a quarterback-needy team right now.
No, obviously not.
You've basically got Kirk Cousins and maybe Baker Mayfield.
Maybe
and
Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and Russell Wilson. And these are guys that, teams are moving on from in some cases, right, with Russell Wilson. And then you have the draft. And we're looking at a draft where quarterbacks might go 1, 2, 3. So if you're a team that's in need of a quarterback or is sort of hoping one falls to you and you're not picking in the top 3 picks, you might be talking about QB4, QB5, and how much you like those guys. And depending on your view of this draft class, that's not a great place to be at all. So I think the Giants might be looking at this and saying, okay, we're going to have to give Daniel Jones another go at this, if only for no alternative options. Maybe we'll roll the dice in the second or third or lower rounds and grab a guy, like Michael Penix Jr. or Spencer Rattler from South Carolina, just someone that we think maybe has the potential to be a starter down the line, but we don't have to rely on day one, and is just a better contingency option.
Right. So I guess the argument, the counter argument I would make then, and I think I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said, is if you didn't have Daniel Jones under contract for this year, it would be utter desperation for a quarterback at 6. So at least you have the backstop of him being there, where if he wasn't here and you're picking 6th, if one of those top 3 teams don't want to move down, and they might just say, we're picking these quarterbacks, we're not going, and you talked about the free agent market and quarterback, it's not a place you want to be, you would be stuck with pretty much nothing at the position, which is not a place you want to be either.
You would, but you'd also almost certainly be able to get him back at a much cheaper deal, right? Like if Daniel Jones had the same season that he had under the franchise tag,
fair point.
You would expose him to the open market and you'd say, hey, we're happy to bring you back, but for a fraction of $40 million a year.
I got you. That makes sense.
He's probably not going to get a better offer than that. So, yeah, you theoretically, the space on the depth chart right now would be blank, right? And that's a terrible place to be. But I do think you would be able to get Daniel Jones back in that spot for less money.
Well, and Sam, too, it just kind of further shows what an inexact science this all is. I mean, hindsight is 20/20. You can say, you gave him that contract and he played XYZ way. But had it gone the other direction, it's like patting yourself on the back. We made the right choice there, and vice versa. Oh, we franchise tagged him. He had a great season. Oh, if you franchise tagged him and he didn't, all that kind of stuff. So it's hard to tell. I mean, you look at, especially in the quarterback market in the draft, there's a lot of guys that people are high on that we forget we do this every year. And, you remember people who are big on Josh Rosen being a generational talent, and not to, throw shade at him, but it's such a subjective decision that you got to kind of live and die by them.
Yeah. And they're all calculated gambles.
Right.
It's not like they did what they did a year ago thinking that it was like, there was no chance that it went south. They knew that it was a bit of a risk, but they thought it was worth it. Because they bought into the upside, they bought into the positive, the signs of life, the optimistic outlook of what Daniel Jones had done that year one, and they thought that was worth the risk to be able to keep Saquon Barkley around and use the franchise tag that way.
And also save money to sign a guy like Okereke, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, free up some money. I mean, it would have been a lot of money in that unideal frame in terms of being guaranteed year one on the cap. Right? It would have been a large number that way. So you know why they did it. It's not like this was just a bout of madness. They lost their minds. They got crazy. They did something completely ridiculous. They took a gamble, and it didn't work out for them, and now they're in this situation. But you're right. Ultimately, the bigger problem is Daniel Jones didn't have the year they wanted him to have. So whether you did it that way or whether you did it the way I would have done it, you're still in trouble. You still don't have the quarterback based off last year.
Absolutely. No, I totally get where you're coming with that. So at 6, let's say one of those 3 top guys are quarterback, right? You're sitting there, and they're all gone. You're looking at potentially anyone not named Marvin Harrison, minus one other guy. Where would you go for the Giants in terms of wide receiver? Bowers, I don't know how much you like him. One of the offensive tackles. Evan Neal's obviously still there. He hasn't been great his first 2 years. What direction would you go with 6 overall?
I think I would probably grab an offensive tackle, but I think you're right. When you start listing off those options, it's a good spot to be, other than the fact that you might need a quarterback and don't have that option, But you're right. There's going to be at least one of those top 3 wide receivers, Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors from LSU, and Rome Odunze from Washington. I think at least one of those guys will be there. All 3 of those guys are top 10 talents. I think in any given year, they would be the number 1 wide receiver in the draft. There will be one of the tackles there. You might get the best tackle available at that spot. Pick your favorite to come in and play right tackle right away. And I don't think any of those guys can't play right tackle, just because they've been college left tackles. I think generally speaking, if you're taking a guy in the draft, you can bank on the idea that you can flip him to the other side of the line without there being any problems. Every now and again, you're going to find a guy that just can't and is for some reason weirdly one-sided. But if you're making that switch day one, it's already a big adjustment. It's, it happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
So you just pick your favorite tackle, whether that's Fashanu from Penn State, whether it's Joe Alt from Notre Dame, whether that's Fuaga, if you think he's that good, from Oregon State, and he is the natural right tackle, or the guy that's been playing right tackle. That's what I would do. I would grab the offensive lineman. That line was a mess. That's not going to help whoever the quarterback is, even if it's Daniel Jones again. That group needs to be upgraded.
If you're just tuning in, we've got PFF Sam Monson on the set with us on BBK. And one thing, Shmelk, you bring up Bowers quite a bit. He's a great tight end. I'm curious because we're so conditioned to think like these positions should be drafted here, these positions shouldn't. You look at what Detroit did last year with Jahmyr Gibbs, taking a running back in the first round, which is a faux pas almost in today's NFL, and how well that worked out for them. At some point, is there a talent that you're like, okay, well, I'm going to put the positional value aside and say this guy is somebody who can make an impact, and I'm going to say let's trust that.
Definitely. I mean, I think every year there are players where we have this idea of positional value and where you should take a guy, and there are players that come along where you should ask yourself the question: is he so special that we ignore the rules? I think Kyle Hamilton was one of those players a couple of years ago for Baltimore. You don't draft safeties that high. We were asking the question: should you draft Kyle Hamilton number 2 overall in that draft because he's that special? And, the way he's playing right now, you can make the argument that you could do that. Bijan Robinson was another one, like in the same class as Jahmyr Gibbs, where Bijan is so special. We're saying, do you throw out the rules? You don't draft a running back in the top 10. Is he so good that we just forget it? He will make it worth it. Quentin Nelson back in the day as well was the same thing. You don't take a guard in the top 5, the top 10. Quentin Nelson is so good. Do we throw that out and say he will make it worth the while? And Kyle Pitts was another one. Now, Brock Bowers' problem is that Kyle Pitts was one of those guys, right? So the last time at that position we asked this question, it didn't really work out. We drafted Kyle Pitts, number 4 overall, because he was so special that it didn't matter that he was a tight end. He can just be a playmaker. He's an athlete. He can be an amazing weapon for this offense. And as much as he's flashed, as good as he looks, it hasn't really panned out that way. Like, he hasn't made the impact to justify number 4 overall. And for Bowers, a guy who is undersized, if everyone saw that picture of him at the Super Bowl standing next to Gronk. I mean, those two guys play the same position, and they're not even vaguely the same size human being, right? He's an undersized, sort of receiving move type tight end. He might be good enough to get put into that question and to be taken that high. But I do think that Kyle Pitts being the last guy for whom that was the question is going to work against him.
That's fair.
By the way, next segment, we might try to get some calls in at 201-939-4513. So get on the lines. We'll try to take a couple calls, a couple more for Sam Monson first. It's funny, and everyone does bring up the Jahmyr Gibbs point you brought up too. But I'll make this argument. How do we know if they didn't pick Joey Porter Jr., Deontay Banks, the Lions aren't better this year than if they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs? You know what I mean? Like, they played well with Jahmyr Gibbs, and would they have been better now and long term? Because guess what? Lions still really need a quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, would that have made them better off? I think that's a question we still don't know the answer to be quite honest with you.
This is why I think, football analysis, the NFL, it's always so incredibly difficult because you never get the other side of the A-B analysis, right? You're only ever working from half the information. So we bring up all the time, everyone is doing the revisionist history on Jordan Love and the Packers, right? And they're like, the Packers have found the answer. You draft a quarterback, you sit him for 2 or 3 years, and then you put him on the field. And even now, you say, well, it worked out. He looks great. Jordan Love looks like the next great young quarterback at that position. And you're like, okay, let's assume that that's true, that was actually the way. He's only good because they sat him for a couple of years, right? Did they leave a Super Bowl on the table because they, instead of drafting a wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers in the first round, they drafted Jordan Love? Like, this is a question we don't know. We look at this as an unquestioned success because he's good now, but we don't know what the other side of the equation looks like. Maybe they would have been better off finally giving Aaron Rodgers, another weapon to work with instead of the guy, his successor, someone that's literally there to take his job down the line, and we just have no idea. So I think you're right. We're only ever working from incomplete information, and you have to try and figure out like what the learnings are from each one of these instances.
Well, it's also got to be kind of a peril of roster building, right? Because it's the balance of long-term relevance versus short-term success. And if you have that short-term success, sometimes you put yourself in a position for, all right, we got this success, and then now we have to rebuild because we can't afford to maintain the success and what have you. So it's, a double-edged sword in that way a little bit.
Yeah, and it's never a static thing. It's always, you always have next year. I mean, even you look at teams like the Chiefs. We just did on our podcast, fixing every single team in the NFL. You're like, well, the Chiefs should be easy. They just won the Super Bowl. How much fixing could be involved? But then you look at their roster and you're like, there's a lot of holes in this team for a team that
a lot of drop balls
ago,
this year.
weeks ago was just proven to be the best team in the NFL. Like, they have an offensive line that's got problems. They've got a receiving core that's got issues. They've got the key defensive players hitting the open market. Like, every year there's a massive amount of turnover that's just forced upon you, even independent of like, how do we get better at this spot and where do we get the new influx of talent? You need to do just a constant level of maintenance on the roster.
And that podcast is the PFF NFL podcast, so check that out. That's with Sam and Steve Palazzolo. Last one for me before we say goodbye here, Sam. Who are the guys in this draft class that you think you're going to like a lot more than the consensus? I know you had tanked out last year. You were a big fan. That ended up working out well for you. Who are some of the guys that you watch and like, why aren't people hiring him? And then the other guys, why do you like that dude so much? Mixed bag last year. I was really high on Tank Dell. That worked well. I was also very high on Jonathan Mingo. That did not work as well. That's true. That's a good point. So it's probably I'm always big into the wide receivers. I really like Jalen Polk from Washington. Everyone's focusing on Odunze. I think Polk's a really good player as well. He won't go
in the first round. He'll go in the second.
I like McMillan, to be honest with you. Yeah. I think he's
They're
a
all
player.
good, but I think Polk is really, really good. Jamari Thrash from Louisville, I think, has got real skills. And he's going to go in the mid-round somewhere.
Yeah, third or fourth round probably. Yeah.
Someone could end up with like a legitimate steal out of him. And then running back has a couple as well. Will Shipley from Clemson, I think, is really good. He's not Christian McCaffrey, right? But he has that ability of McCaffrey you never get a clean shot on him. You look like you have him lined up, and then he takes a little half step, a little shoulder shrug, rides the contact, still keeps going. Really quick feet. He could be an absolute steal for somebody in the mid-round. Not so much that I don't get it, but I think this quarterback class is kind of overrated. The more I get into it, the more I'm like, this is just Caleb Williams and then other people. Like, it's him as number one. There was a period of time where people were like, Caleb Williams or Drake May. That's not a question. Now it's Drake May and Jaden Daniels. I think that is the question, but it's like, because they're over here, they're way, way away from Caleb Williams. Each one of those guys, I think, has got some pretty scary flaws.
What are they, in your opinion, for those two?
Drake May just misses like way too many throws. His special is amazing, but the baseline is nowhere near as good as I think people are giving him credit for. Jaden Daniels has a few red flags in terms of took him a long time. He's pretty old. He was thrown to at least 2 first-round wide receivers in all likelihood. He is reckless with his own body. Like, the guy has an actual Daniel Jones type propensity to just launch himself into bodies. Like, dude, protect yourself. Stop that. And he takes a ton of sacks. J.J. McCarthy has a whole highlight reel of amazing throws from terrible decisions, right? Like threading the ball into a gap that should never have been attempted.
And you're like, in the NFL, that's getting picked, dude, right?
Are you not concerned about Caleb Williams' ball security? I mean, he turns the ball over.
Caleb Williams is not coming off a good year, but the good year sort of took him from being maybe he's a new Patrick Mahomes, like maybe he's superhuman, to okay, he is human. Like he's capable of making mistakes, but his arm talent is ridiculous. His athleticism is ridiculous. His ability to make plays out of structure, to find those Patrick Mahomes like, back against the grain type throws, his ability to create. And I think he's way better at the in structure, in rhythm stuff than people are going to give him credit for. Like, he can drop back in a 3-step concept and just hit the open guy that he read pre-snap as well as anybody in this class. Yeah, this year he had a lot more mistakes than previously, but I still think he's head and shoulders above anybody else.
Well, and quickly, at PFF, you put a lot of effort into evaluating talent in the NFL, coming into the NFL. A lot more than just on the football field goes into that, I'm sure. I've got to ask you, if you've got a prospect that you're evaluating, maybe you take him to dinner, and he orders a 2.5-pound prime rib steak, and maybe doesn't finish all of it, does that affect your thing? And for those watching, someone on this table did that last night. He attacked the St. Elmo prime rib last night. And,
are you really criticizing for not finishing that entire thing? It was huge.
Leaving steak on the table would be a concern. We did a road trip last summer with my dad, and he kept trying to leave like steak on the table. When we stayed in this hotel in Texas somewhere, in Amarillo. By far, by the way, the nicest hotel we stayed in, and also by far the cheapest hotel we stayed in, which says something about Amarillo as a place, as a destination. But they had these incredible steaks, and he's trying to leave half this filet on the table. I'm like, no, look, we're not. I am eating that if you're not eating it. It is being finished before this meal is done.
We gotta give an applause though to John Schmuck for attacking the St. Elmo prime rib. Go on social media and see.
Go to Madeline's. Yeah, it's pretty good. I can show it to Sam right now.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, Sam, good stuff, my man. No problem. I appreciate it, brother. Good seeing you. We'll be back. So we'll take some of your calls at 201-939-4513. We'll return on Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, right after this.
My most used emoji would probably be the 100 sign. If I could have one superpower, it'd be the power of discernment. Being able to know if a person has a pure heart or not. My favorite follow on social media is Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg just posts all day, every day, and it's just, you never know what he's gonna post next. One item on my bucket list is to definitely go to Africa. My biggest pet peeve is when people's breath just, oh my gosh, when it's kicking.
most used emoji is either the laughing emoji or the crying emoji that I use when I'm laughing even extra harder. Something about me not a lot of people know would probably be that I'm a black belt. My favorite follower on social media is Rod Wave. You know, I feel like I'm a huge Rod Wave fan. He's from around my hometown, so, you know, gotta follow him and see what he does with music he drops. My biggest pet peeve, man, I would say when people chew when they're, like, talking when they're chewing.
This is fantastic. Makes your taste buds come alive.
And if they're, like, dragging their feet when they walk. You know, my parents always instilled in me not to do that, so I'll probably say those two things.
It's a thread.
A love affair. I fell in love with the Giants. I saw LT run the touchdown back when they played the Detroit Lions.
Pass down. Phil Simms was my dad's guy.
From generation.
Eli was my guy. To generation.
Giant Special.
We are
The New York Giants.
My most used emoji is laughing emoji. My all-time favorite character of Marvel is the Black Panther. I feel like being the first black character. Me being able to see that at this phase of my life, I like to support him. One thing about me that a lot of people don't know is that I'm 20 years old.
You're young. You're so young.
My biggest pet peeve is rushing. Rushing around, scrambling around, unorganized.
Rush! You want to rush!
It's a thread,
A bond.
they are the epitome of what we try and be.
A love affair.
Eli Manning, first jersey I ever owned.
Giants on 3! 1, 2, 3! Giants! I love to be a wide receiver for Daniel Jones.
Caught! Touchdown, Giants!
We are
The New York Giants.
Let's go Giants! Woo!
All right, we're back here on Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. John Schmelk, Madeline Burke at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, folks. Hey, Giant fans, score a taste touchdown with Hellman's, the official mayonnaise of the New York Giants. Let's take a couple calls here. We'll try to squeeze in. We have Jordan Reed in about 3 or 4 minutes at 201-939-4513. Marcus in Rochester has been holding the longest. Marcus, what's going on?
Hey, how y'all doing, man? I'm finally getting on the show.
Thanks for calling, Marcus.
Yeah.
What do you got?
I was just wanting to state a couple points, about the draft and free agency.
Sure, go ahead.
As people, Giants Nation fans, it's just people forgetting the main picture of what we need. They keep saying draft a quarterback, but you draft a quarterback with that same type of bad offensive play, he's not going to succeed. I don't care if you put Aaron Rodgers back.
Well, Marcus, I would just say be careful drafting on need and talking about that now before free agency, because then those needs can change pretty quick, too.
Yeah, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a little bit of a clearer picture of what those needs exactly are.
Yeah.
Yes, and definitely. So I like with the 6 pick Malik Davis. We need a dog receiver. We need that receiver we know to get open and get separation and make plays. So
we like Malik Neighbors. I would have no problem with that, Marcus. He's a heck of a player.
Like a good neighbor. I'm sorry. I cannot.
It's not Neighbor, it's Neighbors.
Right. Malik Neighbor. If you haven't seen the Schwarzenegger commercial.
And one more thing I like to say before leaving the air. I with the 2 second-round picks, I will go guard, then I will go defensive player. We need somebody with Kayvon and Dexter Lawrence. Dexter can't be the only guy getting pressure.
All right, Marcus, appreciate the call, man. Good
Appreciate
stuff.
the call. Good points, Marcus.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. By the way, folks, don't forget, go subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast. It's our interview podcast. We already interviewed Daniel Jeremiah earlier today. That's going to go up tomorrow. The one that's up there right now, we have our live Q&A with Joe Shane. We've turning into a Giants Huddle podcast. So go find it on the Giants app, giants.com/podcast, or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. It's all there. Make sure you go check it out. We're going to be joined by Jordan Reed from ESPN in just 1 second. But first, a reminder, if you want to go to Giant games, go check it out. Giant fans, take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2024 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And don't forget the Giants official connected TV streaming app. Giants TV brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. You want to just slide them in here, Pearson? We're going to welcome in Jordan Reed here. We're going to do the Chris Collinsworth slide in next to Al Michaels. We're going to try to replicate that as best we can here. Friend of the program, he is Jordan Reed. He's one of the excellent draft analysts over at the mothership ESPN. Jordan, man, it's good to see you. How are you?
Good seeing you guys.
Hello,
and gals,
friend.
too. Hey.
How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
John Schmelk, Madeline Burke, Jordan Reed. We had a chance to talk on the field at the Senior Bowl, Jordan, on the last day, breaking down some of those prospects. So we want to kind of focus on some of the guys at the top here. Obviously, at least in my opinion, I think this is one of the top-heavier drafts that we've seen in a long time. For me, the number of guys that I would consider blue-chip prospects might be more than the last 2 or 3 drafts put together. Right? You have the 3 quarterbacks, you have 3 wide receivers, and in my opinion, 2 offensive tackles and a tight end. Mm-hmm. You're pushing 9, 10 guys that in any year I'd be good picking with the top 5, top 6 pick.
Yeah, and whenever there's a lot of quarterbacks at the top, it always makes it easier on us.
Pushes guys down, right?
There's a quarterback-driven draft, and you're going to hear about Caleb Williams of USC, Drake May of Carolina, and then also Jaden Daniels of LSU. So whenever there's a lot of quarterbacks at the top, it makes it easier on us. But what makes this draft so fun is the wide receiver class.
Yeah.
There's so many guys to choose from, and it really just depends on the size, the type, and the flavor that you want of that group. So I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. And then you add in the offensive tackles. That always helps. We could see as many as 7 go in the first round, which is an astronomically high number.
Heck,
it's wild.
You feel like half the first round is going to be quarterback, wide receivers, and tackle. Like that might be 16 picks. It's crazy.
It's a very offensive-centric draft. We may not even see a defensive guy go in the top 10, which is something that hasn't happened in a very long time.
It's interesting, too, because, oftentimes you build a draft board and you think, okay, this amount of people have a first-round grade. But some people are saying there could be 32 guys with first-round grades in this year's draft. Is that the depth of the talent that you see?
Yeah. It is, and most teams have about 16 to 20 first-round grades, but I've talked to some teams that said they have as many as 25.
I'll tell you what, most years
year.
I'm around 18. This year, I think I'm at 24, which is a lot.
Yeah, I'm right at 21, so I'm right there with you, and the depth of this class is really insane. And it's not just the first round. Like, offensive tackle is deep in the second and third round. Wide receiver goes deep all the way to even the 5th and the 6th round. So there's a lot of depth in this draft class, especially offensively.
Well, and to your point about wide receiver, though, it seems like year in and year out we're getting, growing depth in that position. When you look at guys that are at the top of that position, like Harrison Jr., like Odunze, like Neighbors, what separates those guys from such a deep grab bag position like wide receiver?
Well, I think whenever you're trying to build a wide receiver group, you always want that one alpha guy. And I really think that's what the Giants lack right now. I think they have a lot of rotational role players, but they don't have that go-to guy. Like, if I'm down deep in the fourth quarter and I need somebody to make a play, I don't see anybody on the Giants roster right now that you're pushing the ball to.
If a team's blitzing you and you have a one-on-one, you're throwing it to that guy every time.
Yeah,
right?
And I don't think the Giants have that on the roster right now. And I think that's what separates Marvin Harrison Jr. and Odunze and the Neighbors. When the game is on the line and I need one play to be made, who can I push it to? And I think that's what separates those 3 guys.
I want one more on the wide receivers. Look at the guys in the top. I think Marvin Harrison, he's a 6'4" guy that moves like a 6-foot guy. And I think that kind of summarizes why he's awesome, right? Neighbors just moves different than everybody else in the class. Like, he is prime Odell Beckham type of explosiveness. He can take a slant for 70 yards per touchdown any play. My question on Odunze for you, because I watched every target he took this year. And I know he's supposed to test really well here. That's the expectations. I think as of now, he is still supposed to run, correct?
Yeah,
correct. So you do watch him, though, when teams do play press or tight man. He gets enough separation to make sometimes what's a contested catch, but I don't see the same level of separation with him against man coverage as I do with Neighbors and Harrison. Do you agree with that? And why should it, in your opinion, that be a worry for NFL teams when they're going through that wide receivers at the top?
I agree with that. And I just think Neighbors is a different type of receiver than Harrison Jr. and Odunze. Neighbors is more so of your explosive, dynamic player of where you want to get the ball in his hand right now. He's going to make somebody miss. He turns those 5-yard catches into 80-yard touchdown. And what I wrote on my scouting report with Neighbors is that he plays the game with a full charge battery every single down. That's exactly how he plays the game. But when Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase were coming out, I learned something about competitive catch point.
And that's what Odunze reminds me of, because Jamar Chase didn't separate a ton either, right?
He did not. And
Great
that's
point.
why he reminds me a lot of Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen doesn't create a lot of separation, but when the ball is in the air and he has to make a play, he just finds a way to come down with it. And that's something that's really helped Jamar Chase and then also Justin Jefferson. Neither one of those guys create separation. Well, I shouldn't say a whole bunch. They're both elite guys, but they don't create that consistent separation to where it's like 2 to 3 yards at a time. When they have to go up and make a play and there's guys all around them, they're still able to make those catches, and that's what Rome does.
And he might be the best in the class at that.
He does. I think him and Harrison are on a different level.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the wide receiver is such a deep class right there. Quarterbacks, of course, always kind of the belle of the ball when it comes to draft season. There are a lot that we're talking about. It seems like everyone I talk to has a different order in which they rank their quarterbacks. When you look at the quarterbacks, who are your top 3, top 5 in that order? How does that pan?
So I have Caleb at the top. I have Drake May after that, and then I have Jaden after that at 3. At 4 is where it gets really interesting, where it's J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix or Michael Penix. Just depends on who you talk to. I have McCarthy at 4, then I have Nix and Penix. But you ask 10 different people, they're going to have 10 different orders.
Right.
So this draft class is really interesting, but those 3 guys at the top, they're all so different in so many different ways. Caleb and Drake were really the 2 guys that you heard a lot about coming into the year, and neither one of them had the year that a lot of people thought they were going to have.
A little up and down for both.
A little
guys.
Up and down for both. And then there's always that one quarterback that comes out of nowhere, which was Jaden Daniels. This year he had a Joe Burrow type of ascension this year where he wound up winning the Heisman Trophy. So there's always that one quarterback that comes out of nowhere. But I have it Caleb, Drake, and then Jaden after that. Right now.
Much like Joe Burrow. Transfers to LSU, wins a Heisman, all that good stuff. But, when talking about the Giants, you look at them picking at 6. That doesn't necessarily need to be where they select a quarterback if they choose to. An early second round one, or perhaps doing what the Ravens did a few years ago, trading back into the back end of the first round to get another one of those guys. Is that somebody that, is there somebody in that position that you think could be a good fit for this franchise?
Well, there's 2, Bo Nix and then also Michael Penix. I think those are going to be more so of your second round type of quarterbacks. Then after that, we're getting into Spencer Rattler and Michael Pratt and those types of names. But if the Giants want to go, let's say, wide receiver at 6, they could circle back and take a quarterback like a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix in the second round. It just depends on the options available to them. But that third quarterback could slip if New England trades out or if they elect to go wide receiver. That's where things get really interesting for the Giants. That third quarterback could fall into their lap at number 6 overall. Or if you get the itch to trade up to the Chargers at number 5 overall so you can secure that guy, there's going to be a lot of options on the table for them.
So before we get to the offensive tackles, just to follow up then, when you're separating May and Daniels, and like I watched every drop back those 2 guys had this year, and I think it's interesting because I think you can make an argument to flip-flop them if you wanted to. I have May ahead of Daniels as well, and the reason I put him there is even though I think maybe he's a little bit more scattershot at times, he can, almost too much velocity, airmail stuff over the middle, and he had that rough stretch of 3 games towards the end of the year, which I think people remember more than his really good play early in the season. There were so many NFL-level throws over the middle of the field where you're like, all right, on a Sunday, that throw, he's going to be able to make that throw, and there's not many guys to make that throw. And then opposite with Jaden Daniels, he was so good on deep balls to the perimeter. I mean, it was just slot fade city to Thomas and Neighbors, but I didn't see those smaller windows, timing-based over, a couple crossers to Neighbors and slants to Neighbors, but none of that things that I saw made you as consistently, which I think really does translate to the NFL game. Is that fair, do you think?
No, you're spot on. And Jaden throws a lot of what I call faith throws. Those faith throws, he's just throwing the ball down the field. I know I have Brian Thomas and I have Malik Neighbors. My guy is better than your guy.
Big trust,
I'm going to throw it up to him, and I trust my guy to come down with it. So you see a lot of those faith throws with Jaden, but the scheme just didn't ask him to do a whole bunch as far as over the middle and drive the ball. And I think a lot of people misconstrue arm strength for really driving the ball. And I think Jaden has enough arm strength, but driving the ball in those tight windows, we just didn't really see a whole bunch of it But with Drake, you're seeing him make those tight window throws consistently. And we also have to remember
that Georgia
Tech game
Tez
Walker for half of the year.
Dude, Tez Walker wasn't even available for the first few weeks of the season as well as best receiver. But it's, you look at these things too, and like you said, it's not just what you do, it's what you've been asked to do.
Right.
And that's something that's important to take into consideration in the talent evaluation. A lot of stock is put into some of these like big throws, these big downfield throws, these kind of highlight play. Wow, that was pretty. One of the knocks on Drake is some of those like short yardage, mid-range. Yeah. His mid-range game is not as strong. Is that something that you think is enough of a weakness, or is that something that, that's something that can be addressed?
I think it's all a footwork thing with Drake, which is something that is definitely coachable. And I think switching schemes from year to year really hurt him a lot because the passing concepts were a little different. And there's a lot of times with Drake, his footwork didn't match the depth of the route. So a lot of times he's behind it, or there's just something to where he had to get the ball out a little bit quicker. But it is very frustrating with Drake. Like, he'll throw a 60-yard bomb, and then the next play he'll just dirt a 5-yard bomb.
Yeah.
Man, like, what happened?
Or he'll just airmail a slant, something like that.
So that's just consistency with his footwork.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, his mobility's underrated, though.
It is.
He runs a lot, and I think people talk about Daniels. I actually think Drake May is better at sack avoidance than Jaden Daniels is.
I would agree
I think
with that.
I think Daniels is more explosive and a better runner. Mm-hmm. I think Drake May's better pocket presence, and I think he's able to avoid sacks better.
I agree. And, Jaden has a very slight frame, and he just takes, you've seen it on tape, he takes some huge hits.
Slide,
so he's going to have to learn
to
get down. All it takes is one hit, and I think he's going to learn his lesson. So he's got to learn to protect himself a little bit. And, he as soon as he enters the NFL, he's going to be one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the NFL without question. But May really reminds me a lot of Justin Herbert when he was coming out of Oregon. Now, he's not as big as Herbert. Herbert's about 6'6", 240. I think Drake's going to come in probably a little over 6'3", about 230. So there is a little bit of a size discrepancy, but as far as the arm strength, the mobility, and just the trajectory that he eventually could make, he reminds me a lot of Herbert.
Offensive tackles. Olu Fashanu is interesting. You see him look so graceful in pass protection.
Yep.
Then I went back and I watched a lot of his run blocking last week. He's on the ground a lot.
Yes.
And how do you put that together? He looks like such a graceful athlete going backwards, which should theoretically be the harder thing to do, yet in the run game, and is he trying to overcompensate for maybe a lack of upper body strength by leaning too much? Why is he on the ground so much in the run game?
Well, I think a lot of it is just he lets his technique go on vacation, is what I call it. So he's just trying to prove that he's such a physical guy. When he just tries to go in so hard to where he forgets to bring some things with him. And in previous scouting years, I learned this a lot. You would rather take the guy that's already a ready-made pass protector and eventually mold him into being a good run blocker as opposed to vice versa. Just because it's really, really hard to teach guys to pass protect. So already having that foundation and that skill set walking through the door, I think he's going to be just fine. And there's plenty of games on tape of where he's being physical, like the Michigan game. I thought he was terrific as a run blocker. So I think between him and Alt, with Alt, if we had a game tomorrow, like you could put Alt out there and he'd be just fine. But with Fashanu, you worry a little bit about the run blocking. But with him already being a ready-made pass protector, it makes the development a little bit easier.
And Jordan, just for me real quick, he does get bull rush sometimes in the pass protection, but to me, that's more of a hand technique thing. His issue is when he lets guys get into his chest and he's, doing the bear hug instead of the, punching stuff. If he gets his hands in the right spot, he's fine in terms of dealing with power and pass pro, at least in my opinion.
And we have to remember, Olu only had 9 career starts coming into the year. So this dude is still a baby out there. He's still learning. He has so many natural gifts to where he just needs those in-game reps. But as the year went along, you saw things start to click for him, and there's going to be some rough patches, but you're going to take that when he already has that physical ceiling as a pass protector. He just needs reps as a run blocker, but as he gets more reps, he gets more experience, it's eventually going to click for him. When
you look at the draft and who stands out in the offensive line, the tackles are always kind of the ones that kind of get that shine. But in terms of the interior offensive line, this is a big need for the Giants as well. Who are the stars of that category in your eyes?
Well, the guard class, there isn't that high upper end type of player like we've seen in years past. Like there's no Quentin Nelson or anything like that. But second or third round guys, there's a lot. Cooper Beebe from Kansas State is one that I like quite a bit. And then the center class is really good too. Zach Frazier, Jackson Powers Johnson. Of course, we saw him a ton at the Senior Bowl. Cedric Van Pran of Georgia, who I think has center guard flexibility. But this guard class is really good. Troy Fatanu, there's going to be a lot of debate on if he's a tackle or a guard. So there
Jordan Morgan too, right?
Jordan Morgan's another one that has that positional flexibility. So there's going to be a lot of debate as far as who has that certain positional flexibility, but I don't think there's a high-end first-round type of player on the interior.
All right, final question before we say goodbye, Jordan. Thanks for the time, as always. guy that you think, or two, that you like really much more than other draft analysts, and maybe a guy that you look at other people that have ranked really high and you're like,
Ooh, what position?
I don't really see
what
it.
Position?
You can give me anybody you want.
Okay. I'm going to give you guys need a receiver, so I'm going to give you two receivers that I like
fine.
quite
That's
a
great.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is Malik Washington of Virginia.
He was great in Frisco, right?
I like him quite a bit. And then the other is Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint from Georgia. He was at the Senior Bowl. He's a really good player. He's only had 2 drops in his 4 years at Georgia. And both
Very
of those
reliable receiver, right?
Both of those drops came in 2021. It's 2024, so it's been a long time since he's dropped the football. So both of those guys are one that I like. Those would be the 2 receivers that I like quite a bit.
Very good.
I like it. We'll keep an eye on them.
Jordan, awesome stuff, my man.
Thank you, as always.
Good seeing you.
You too.
And everybody, thanks for being with us on Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Thanks for sticking with us all day. Thank you to Madeline. Thank you to Jordan. Thank you to Sam Monson and Dan Duggan for joining us over the course of today's show. And don't forget to go check out that Joe Shane Q&A that should be up on the Giants YouTube channel and on the Giants Huddle podcast audio feed. All right, everybody, we'll see you tomorrow. We're back tomorrow with another live show at 12:30 from the NFL Combine in Indy. We'll see you then.
Introducing the Lisa Chill Collection, your answer to hot nights. These mattresses beat the heat with ultra-cool covers, whisking away heat for the perfect sleep temperature. Save up to $460 on Chill mattresses and get 2 free pillows when you shop now. iHeart listeners can save an extra $50 off by visiting lisa.com/iHeart. That's LEESA.com/iHeart. Exclusions apply. See lisa.com for more details.
You deserve to treat yourself, so turn your tax refund into a U fund and give yourself a Straight Talk Wireless Extended Silver Unlimited plan and get a new Samsung Galaxy A14 on them. You can get a great everyday value on wireless with Straight Talk's Unlimited plan starting at $25 a line per month for 4 lines. You'll save so much you'll be enjoying that refund all year long. It's the refund that keeps on refunding. Find Straight Talk at straighttalk.com or at your local Walmart store.
Taxes and fees not included. Offer valid through 4/14/24 while supplies last. Online only. Must purchase a Straight Talk Extended Silver Unlimited plan to qualify. Limit of 5 phones per customer. Family plan discount with 4 lines, all on the Silver Unlimited plan. Not combinable with auto pay discount.